Hi there, my name is Nils, and in this video we're going to be covering the revised and updated edition of the 13 things I wish I knew when I got started with 3D printing. So stick around, we'll be right back on the 3D Printing Zone. Now before we jump into the 13 things, I want to give a little bit of a background just so you know how I came up with these and why I produced this video. I actually produced a very similar video to this on my other channel called Learn to DIY, and in that video I went over these 13 topics, but I had some audio issues and the video got really lengthy, but it's got over 500,000 views at this point, maybe more by the time you watch it. And a lot of people really responded to that and had comments and had lots of good things to say. They just wanted an updated version that didn't have audio issues and maybe was a little more concise. This is the revised edition of that video, and I'm hoping it covers some of the things that you may take a little longer to learn if someone doesn't share these with you. These are things that I just took several months or in some cases years to learn about, and I had to learn them on my own, and it took way too much time. I wish I knew about them early on. So to come up with these 13 things, I actually conducted a poll with some of my friends who are 3D printer users, as well as some online forums for 3D printing. I got some great feedback. There's probably more that I'm going to do, so stay tuned for a follow-up video that you'll have a link to at the end of this video that shows you the next probably 7 things just to get myself up to 20. So I've been 3D printing for several years now. I started out with a small little PrinterBot simple metal printer. Cost me about $700 3 or 4 years ago, and now you can get these much larger printers like this one or this one for quite a bit less money, in the $300 to $400 range. And they have a lot more features and they're a lot larger and they can do a lot more. But that's because, as with all technology, it comes down in price over time. So nowadays is a great time to get into the 3D printing field, but there's a few things you need to know about it so that you don't think that it's going to be just like Xerox printing or something like that. And that leads us into number 13. The 13th thing I wish I knew is this is a hobby and you need to be patient. So because this is a hobby, you need to treat it like such. I had a friend at work who actually got a 3D printer that he put together with his son, and he said, I'm going into this with the attitude that I know my prints aren't going to come out great, they'll come out okay, and I'll get better over time. I'll tweak things, I'll learn more about it, and I'll treat it like a craft that I'm going to get better at little by little. And I thought that was the best attitude you can have really about 3D printing. This is not at the point where you buy a 3D printer and it's plug and play and you're ready to go right off the bat. That is not the case with this. There's going to be some failures, some struggles, some frustration. And so you have to go into this knowing that that's the case. But if you have that mindset and you're ready to try and you're ready to accept some occasional failures in the process of getting better, then you're going to really enjoy this and come out with some really cool stuff. So it's important to remember this is a hobby. If you're doing this professionally, you have to have that same mindset, honestly. You have to really put the time into it just like any other hobby or any other craft and get good at it. And so if you have that mindset, you're really going to enjoy this, and I think you're going to get the most out of it. Tip number 12 is slicing matters. What I mean by that is slicing is the process by which you have the software prepare your model to be sent to the 3D printer. There's all kinds of settings you can get into. We're going to cover a few of those in these tips. But just remember that how you slice things and what software you use and all of those settings, those all play into a successful print. You can't just leave everything at the default factory settings and expect that you're going to get a great print off of your printer. There are different printer profiles, which we'll get into, and there's just so many settings. So feel free to tweak the speed that the printer is moving at, for example, both when it's printing the object itself as well as maybe some supports or bed adhesion or different things like that. You're going to want to tweak things like the resolution and try out what works and what doesn't. You're going to want to tweak the fan speed and make sure that you're getting good bridging. And there's all these cool little things that you can get into and adjust. But that slice that you do makes all the difference. If you don't slice something well, if you don't have your settings primed and tuned for your printer and for the print that you're working on at that time, then you're going to have some frustrating times, and you're just going to have to keep trying until you get that right and figure out what went wrong. Now, just a moment ago I mentioned print profiles, and that's number 11, is print profiles, which are basically a set of settings that you can save. It's a batch of settings that you can save for a particular type of print that you're going for. So for example, you may have a print profile that you're going to save off for working with a flexible material like TPU, and that might be different temperatures, different speeds, different things like that based on that material and what works well with that. You're also probably going to want to have some different settings of quality in your print profiles. Most slicers, like Cura for example, has draft quality and fine quality, and so it has a few different settings there, and basically it's 0.3 resolution, 0.2 and 0.1, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But what that means is this group of settings that you're saving off, you can save that so you don't have to tweak all of those things and go in and manually adjust them all later. You might want to have, I'd say, at least 5 or 6 different print profiles that you're using on a regular basis. So just think of print profiles as a really easy way to save a setup that you've got. Maybe you did something that worked really well and you like that resolution, you like the speed, the heat settings, all of that worked out really well. You got your print to come out the way you wanted it. Make sure you save off that print profile so that when you want to come back to that particular batch of settings, that it's already saved, it's right there ready for you. You can usually export your print profiles as well, so if you want to use them on a different computer or if you upgrade your computer to something else, you can still save those print profiles off, particularly for that specific slicing software. So don't be afraid to use print profiles. They will save you a lot of time in the long run. Tip number 10, and a lot of people don't know about this one, is ironing. Ironing is the process of running the hot end over the top layer of whatever it is you're printing to smooth it out. Basically what it's going to do is it's going to leave that hot end heated up to full temperature, and it's going to just smooth everything out. It's basically melting right across the top. And what that does is it tends to give you a nice glossy smooth surface on the top, just like you expect to get on the bottom for the part that's attached directly to the bed, especially if you're using a mirror or a glass bed. So ironing is really cool. It's just a little setting you can enable in your settings for your different slicing profile, and you can check that on or off. Be aware though that it will add quite a bit of time because it's going to slowly go over it. It can't do it really quickly. But if you want to do something where you want a nice clean top on it and that really shiny surface, then ironing is a great way to go. Tip number 9 is have a little help from your friends. What I mean by that is that there is a huge community of 3D printing nerds out there like you and me, people who are either getting into this just now or are really advanced and doing some really impressive stuff. So for example, I've got a TiVo Tornado right here. It's one of the printers I use the most. And with that, there is a TiVo Tornado users group on Facebook, and I'm on there pretty regularly. I see that in my Facebook feed, and I'm seeing these cool things that people are printing, and then they'll share the STL file or the model that they're using to print that. They'll share the profile settings that we just talked about earlier. They'll share, just all the different things that made that successful. A lot of times it's a great way to find out about different upgrades that you can get for your printer, no matter what kind of printer you have, and different things that you may or may not have considered. There's a lot of times where we're covering products and different things that have helped to get a better result in your print, and things that we've learned along the way. And hopefully, as you frequent those types of forums and group discussions, you'll get to the point where you'll be that one who's able to help a lot of people out when they're having some troubles with their prints. So I'll throw some links down in the description for some of the forums and groups that I participate in, and you can definitely check those out. I'm sure there's a lot more. There's probably hundreds and hundreds of 3D printing groups out there, but be sure to check those out. Don't feel like you have to do this on your own. There are a lot of great and talented people out there who are willing to share and help you get better at this. All right, so tip number 8 is materials matter. There are lots of different materials, and we call them filaments, what we're using on the 3D printer here. So lots of different filaments that you can use when you're 3D printing. The most common one that you'll see, and what most prints that you're going to see around are made out of, is called PLA. It's basically a plastic type material that's meltable at a certain temperature. PLA is great for most things. In fact, that's what I print just about everything out of, unless I have a special reason to not use PLA. So for regular around the house type of things, it works really great. It's also pretty affordable. You can buy a spool of PLA, which typically comes in a spool of 2.2 pounds or 1 kilogram, and that's roughly about 300 meters of PLA. And that runs anywhere from about $12 or $13 on up to $25, $30, or $40, depending on what you're going to get. Most of the spools that I get are $15 to $20 each, and that will last you quite a ways. You can print a lot with one spool of PLA. So PLA is great for most things, like I say, but some of the reasons you might want to go with a different material are if you need something flexible. So for example, there's a product called Ninja Flex, or there's this stuff which is TPU. You may have heard the term TPU. It's used in a lot of phone cases. If you're buying these kind of soft, squishy, flexible phone cases that protect your phone pretty decently, you can actually print your own phone cases with a 3D printer, and almost every 3D printer can handle TPU pretty well. It's just a matter of adjusting some settings and getting it tuned so that it's going to optimally work for TPU material. Another really common material to print with is called ABS. ABS, I would guess, is probably the second most common material to use for a filament. ABS has some qualities that are really great about it, which are it actually has a higher melting point or melting temperature and lasts longer when it's outside. So if you're going to be printing something that you intend to use outdoors, ABS is likely the way to go. It's not biodegradable, it's going to last a little bit longer, and while it'd be nice if it was biodegradable, you actually want that longevity or that durability that you can get from ABS if you're using something that's meant to last. One of the things that you need to be aware of with ABS, however, is that it is a little bit more brittle than PLA. It's not crazy difference or anything like that, but just something to keep in mind. But the bigger thing is it's more difficult to work with. A lot of times you need to have an enclosure around your 3D printer in order to print successfully with ABS. And that's because it's very sensitive to any temperature changes, it's very sensitive to any drafts, and so if you're printing in an area that has any draft whatsoever, even an air conditioning vent or a heater vent, you do not want that draft getting on the ABS print as it's printing. What happens is it will peel away from the bed. And that's the second thing you want to keep in mind with ABS is you need to create a better type of adhesion that's specific to ABS. And if you want to learn more about that, do a quick search on ABS Slur, S-L-U-R, and you'll find some great information on how to use that. You can make it yourself, and it will actually have a great impact on how well ABS prints stick to the bed. One last one I wanted to talk about that I think is really cool is wood filament. Now, wood filament is not actually wood. I've heard that they actually put sawdust or some material, some actual wood material into it. I'm not sure if that's true. But the fact is, it looks a little bit like wood. It looks really kind of like a beige-brown PLA, but it actually can sand and it can accept some stain a little bit, and it has a cool look. There are profiles that you can use where the temperature of your hot end will go up and down to create a little bit of a grain look. I've never found one that I think looks amazing, but wood PLA in general is pretty fun to work with. And if you do use PLA, then you have to print the obligatory rite of passage Groot. Not sure why that is, but it seems like every time someone gets wood PLA, they print a Groot. So here's my Groot. Check it out. Try one yourself. So wood PLA is pretty fun stuff to work with. I actually used it to print my Learn to DIY logo for my other channel and printed this piece here, and I think it came out pretty cool. I've yet to actually stain and sand it, but hopefully I'll get to that one day. But it looks pretty cool as is, which is why I haven't really gotten around to it. Okay, tip number 7 is keeping an eye on things. This is a hugely important one and one that really impacts my workflow with 3D printing because it gives me visibility into what's going on at all times. So you'll see right behind me on my TiVo Tornado, I've got this little web camera here that's hooked up to a Raspberry Pi. We'll talk about that in just a second. And on this, I'm able to keep an eye on things no matter what process or what part of the process I'm in for 3D printing. Whether it's that first layer right away and I've walked away and just need to keep an eye on it remotely, or whether it's 3 days into a print. So this is a cheap camera. It's $8 actually. I'll put a link to that in the description. I've got another camera coming in the mail right now that I'm really excited to get that I think will give a higher quality, better resolution image, just better optics on it, because I'm at that point where I'd really like to make better videos of the prints themselves. So keeping an eye on things is really handy because, for example, not too long ago I printed a ukulele and I started the print right before I left town, knowing that I could actually remotely control my printer, which we'll talk about in one of the next steps. But I was able to keep an eye on things, which I'm really glad for, because after about 2 days of printing, I got pretty far into this ukulele, something went haywire and the thing just exploded basically. It was basically printing out filament all over the place into midair and creating this big wig looking thing. And luckily I did catch that after several hours. I wasn't checking on it all through the day, but when I did catch it, I was able to remotely stop the print so I didn't waste any more filament. So definitely consider a minimal investment that it takes to keep an eye on things. Another thing you can use is an IP webcam, something where you can just keep an eye on it no matter what. It's not connected to the printer necessarily, but it's just a way to keep an eye on things. I love this little guy right here, the Wise Cam, and I don't know if you can see that here, but these little Wise Cams are $20 or $30, and they're full HD quality, and they have a cloud storage app, and they're very easy to work with. I'll put a link to each of these cameras in the description below, so be sure to check those out. But these are really cool products that definitely make 3D printing a lot more convenient. Number 6 is Octopi or Octoprint to the rescue. This is a huge one for me. In fact, I don't know if I'd be as excited about 3D printing as I am if I didn't have the option to manage everything remotely. So on this printer that I've got over here, my Tivo Tornado, I can actually, I've got a Raspberry Pi, which is this little $35 computer that you can buy, and you can actually buy them even cheaper nowadays. They're very, incredibly capable little machines. HDMI, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, USB, all this stuff in this little $35 package. You can load what's called the Octopi image onto that, and then you can leverage the power of Octoprint. Octoprint is software that runs on your Octopi, on your Raspberry Pi, connects directly to your 3D printer and via USB, and then with that you can control just about everything you want about your 3D printer from anywhere in the world using a web interface. Now typically this is restricted to your local network, but there are some workarounds that you can use to make that open up, either open up the port or use a third-party software to be able to access that anywhere in the world, which is what I do. So I'll put some links down in the description to setting up Octopi and Octoprint, but this allows you to do so many cool things. You can pause your print, you can stop it, you can cancel your job, you can start a print, you can upload things to it from anywhere. You can do all these really impressive things just by having this $35 computer hooked up to your printer. So for me, I'd say hands down that is the best upgrade that you can buy for your 3D printer, is a Raspberry Pi loaded with Octoprint. One of the other things it can do is you can watch exactly where the placement of the hot end is as it's going. You can preview what each layer by layer printout will look like. You can control your webcam. So I've got this webcam hooked up to Octopi or Octoprint, and then it automatically creates a time-lapse video of each print for me. I don't have to think about it, it just does it every time. It exports it, and I'm ready to download that anytime I want to of any job I've ever done. So super, super handy to use. You don't have to use an SD card. The alternative, I don't have this one over here hooked up to Octoprint, and with that I have to load everything onto an SD card from my computer, then take it down, pop the SD card in, select that file, and print. Not a huge deal, but it's 2018. We don't need to be using SD cards to transfer things back and forth. So get yourself a Raspberry Pi and load up Octoprint. You will thank me. Number 5 on my list is understanding support. Now, what I mean by support is this is material that gets printed, and the slicing software determines this, but it prints out some material that when you have something that's in midair, essentially, it can stand on top of this little material that you've printed, typically in a line or a pattern of some sort, so that it can actually successfully print rather than, with gravity, of course, you can't just print in midair for the most part. There's some caveats there. But support gives you the ability to print things. So you imagine Darth Vader, for example, with his chokehold out there. If you want to do that arm and the angle is pretty much straight like this, or especially if it's down, there's no way to actually do that without some support underneath for the hand, for example, to print on. So with that, you print these little supports, and they're made to be removable. You actually just take them right off when you're done, and you have several options for support. You can do support everywhere, which means that, for example, in that Darth Vader case, if there's a little stand that he's on, like this guy here, then you can actually have it go from the stand up to his arm in that case, which is how this one came out. Or you can actually just say only do support if it's touching the build plate, the bed itself. And so that's another option. So usually you can determine by looking at something if it's going to need support in some place. If you're downloading a file, often they'll say whether or not they recommend using support. And as you get to know your 3D printer, then that will help you understand when you should and do not need to use support. I definitely recommend that you don't use it if you don't need it, but it's important that you understand when to use it. And basically that's anytime you feel like the 3D printer is not going to be capable of printing something unless it has support. If it's got nothing underneath it to hold it, and the angle at which it's printing. So in the arm case again, if I'm printing like at this angle here, I know my 3D printer can do that. That's a slight enough angle that I think it'll be okay. But as soon as I go down here, it's not going to be able to print straight out like that successfully. And that has to do with what's called bridging. So again, if you want to learn a little bit more about that, just do a quick search on 3D printing bridging and support, and you can learn all about that. All right, we're getting down there. We're on number 4 now, and number 4 is rafts, brims, and skirts. So these are 3 types of bed adhesion options that you can use with your 3D printer. And again, just like many of these things that refer to the print itself or what gets printed, this is something that is determined in the slicing software. So these are options that you can select. You can say I want to use a skirt, I want to use a brim, or I want to use a raft, or nothing at all. So let's start with the skirt. What a skirt is in 3D printing is it's a series of lines, and you can specify how many that go around the 3D print before it starts printing. The objective of this is really to get rid of any guck that's on the end of your hot end, and then also make sure that it's got a nice good flow coming out before it starts on the 3D print itself. So this is kind of a precautionary measure. Just like with most of these things, once you get things really tuned and tweaked, you may or may not ever need to do a skirt, but if you just want to be sure that it's going to get a good print, and if there's anything on the hot end, like little globs, for example, or some that you've extruded just to keep things clean, you can use a skirt to make sure none of that gets onto your 3D print itself. The second thing is a brim. So a brim is similar to a skirt, but imagine that that skirt comes all the way into the object itself. So it makes several passes around until it gets to the actual 3D printed object. So if you're printing a can, for example, it'll do circles around until it gets into the can itself and will start printing. Now that serves two purposes. First is the exact same thing as a skirt, which is to get a nice clean flow of filament before you start printing your object. But the second is because it's attached to the object, it's going to adhere to the bed a lot better. If you are trying to print, for example, a marker, let's say, so something that's tall and thin, and it doesn't have much of a base on it, then you'll definitely want to use a brim, because it's going to be a lot easier for that thing to fall over or to skip or get knocked over if you don't have that adhesion to the bed. But by adding that brim to it, you're going to give it a lot more surface area on the bed itself for that object to stay in place as you print. Now the third option that you have is a raft. Now a raft is something I've used several times, but I honestly have not used it much at all in the last year or so. I just don't see a lot of reason for it. But what it is it prints a whole body of filament out underneath your print. You can see here I've got these little drawers that I made, and I used a raft on those. That was what was recommended because it has these little waves. It doesn't have a flat bottom on these drawers so that they can interconnect. One of the things I did notice, however, is that you tend to get kind of a poorer quality of smoothness, I guess, on the bottom of the print when you're using a raft, because it's trying to have the bottom of your print kind of float on top of the raft so that the raft is easily detachable from the object itself. In general, if you've got some comments below on times when a raft was necessary or it really worked for you, feel free to leave that comment. For the most part, I haven't found it to be all that useful. So those are the three types of bed adhesion you can use, and in many cases you really don't need any of them. If you've got a standard object, going back to that little Darth Vader, for example, it's got a base on it already, it's got plenty of area, it's not super tall compared to its width, and so I didn't need to do any sort of a bed adhesion, no skirts, no brims, no rafts on that, and it works out just fine. And I think you'll find that's the case with many of your prints, especially once you get the bed nice and clean and you get things nailed down. Now number 3 originally was get sticky, and what I meant by that was making sure to apply some sort of sticky adhesive stuff to the bed of your printer. I'm going to have to recant that somewhat because I actually don't do that anymore. I don't actually put anything. I used to use Aquanet or a glue stick or different things like that on the printer bed. I don't find a need for that anymore because what I found that works best is actually printing on my glass mirror tile here, and I just keep it clean. I just make sure that that temperature is at the right temperature, and you don't need that. I will say, however, that there are times when having that glue stick, for example, or sometimes Aquanet, if you are having trouble getting good adhesion, then that's when it makes sense to put something sticky on there, especially if you've got a situation where you've got something that's having a hard time staying on the bed, or that gets knocked off, or is just for whatever reason just not staying quite as you think it should. With a clean bed, then maybe you can try some of the adhesives like Aquanet hairspray or a glue stick. And sometimes you can get these really big glue sticks. I've got one right here. You can get these really large glue sticks so you don't have to spend quite as much time spreading this out. If you are going to use this stuff, I recommend with a hairspray that you cover up your the fans and that kind of stuff so you're not spraying into your fans. And if you're going to use glue, then probably just put it on the areas of the bed that you know it's going to be printed on. You don't need to cover the entire area of the bed if you're just printing in a little area this big. So that's a good thing to use if you need it, but even better than that, just don't use it. Keep your bed nice and clean. Now number 2, I'm actually going to update as well. On the original video, number 2 was print on glass. And the reason I say that is because I've had really good success with using this little mirror. This is a mirror that I got a pack of them, 6 of them from the hardware store for $10. Been using this one mirror tile for over a year now, and it's worked great. And it gives the bottom of my prints a really beautiful smooth finish. It's like looks like reflective surface. That's how nice it looks on the bottom. So they look great. I've had friends who have been using the stock bed that came with their printer the entire time they had it, and then they eventually got a glass bed or a mirror tile, and they say, oh my gosh, I wish I would have done this years ago because this looks so much better and it works really well. So I like to keep a nice clean bed on the mirror. I keep some Windex and paper towel around and keep that mirror really shiny clean, and it sticks really well. I don't have to do anything else for the most part. So shortly after making my last video, I realized that I don't have to do that. Actually, I think it was from one of the comments that I got in the comment section of the video. So I would recommend just keeping that clean. But the other caveat with that is glass is a great option. It is not the only option. There are some really high quality, well functioning beds that you can get on the internet, and I'll put some links to ones that I know work well, whether I've tried them myself or I've worked with people who have used them. There are some beds that people swear by and say there's no other type of bed that you can use for your 3D printer that will work as well. So the gist of number 2 really is get a good bed. Sometimes the one that comes with your printer isn't the best option, so if you're having troubles with adhesion, make sure that the bed that you put on there, and you can usually just put them right on top of the existing bed, is the best one for your printer. Okay folks, you have made it. We're on finally to number 1, and you deserve a pat on the back or a Snickers or a cookie or something. So treat yourself. You did good. You made it through this long video. We're at number 1, and the reason I left this for last is because this really is the most important thing as far as the success rate of your prints. If you can get this one part nailed, then you're going to have a much higher success rate with each of your prints. It makes all the difference, and that is bed leveling and the first layer squish, or that's what I like to call it. So bed leveling and the first layer squish. What bed leveling refers to is the distance that your bed is away from the hot end. And that could be any portion of the bed, the corners, the middle, or anywhere on the bed itself. So you want to make sure that that's just the right space away so that that first layer goes down nice and smooth. It makes contact, it's not too far away, but it's not squishing way far down and not allowing the material to actually come out the end of the hot end. So one of the ways you can accomplish the bed leveling technique is to actually take a piece of paper and put that underneath the first corner, and usually there's settings on your printer to allow you to go to each of the 4 corners. And so you put that paper under there. If you can pull the paper freely and move it around in between the hot end and the bed, then you need to raise the bed up just a little bit using these little knobs here, and everyone's a little bit different, but most printers have these little knobs that you can adjust, these little dials. And so you want to raise that up to where it's just taut. You want to be able to pull it a little bit, and the paper should be able to move under there, but it should be fairly tight. And then if you got it so tight that you can't move the paper, then you need to lower the bed down a little bit. What that represents is the thickness of the filament itself that's coming out of the hot end. So if you get that distance just right, then you're going to get that first layer to squish onto the bed just nicely, but not so much that it's actually going to preclude the actual filament from coming out of the end. So that's what I mean by first layer squish, is that ideally when you're putting that first layer down, you want that bead of filament to make good contact with the bed and not be too high, not be too low, but you want it to squish just a little bit so that it has that good adhesion to the bed itself. And that kind of refers back to the other tips that we've talked about. So if you have to err on one side or the other, I typically recommend erring on the side of squishing it a little bit too much, because if you do too little, then it might just spit out the string and drag it around and not actually make any connection with the bed, and that's going to be an automatic failure. If you're a little on the low side, you'll still be okay. If you're too flat, then nothing can come out, and that means that your first layer, there really isn't one. It's just going to be kind of just a thin paste of filament on there, and then by the time you get to your second layer, it might not have enough to actually grab onto to be able to extrude the filament there. So those are really important. Once you level a bed, you typically don't have to level it all that often. You're not going to have to level it every print, for example, but over time, and especially if the thing gets moved around or on really long prints or multiple prints, you want to just check to make sure that that setting is still good, that your bed is nice and level, and that distance between your hot end and your bed is just where you need it to be. And with that, your success rate for prints is going to go way higher as compared to having kind of an uncontrolled setup basically with your bed leveling. Congratulations, you did it! We made it through all 13 things. There's a lot of information that we covered in here, so be sure to check out those links in the description. I've got an article on my website that covers a lot of the same stuff and has kind of some different details on it though. Sometimes people prefer to see the written version instead, so be sure to check that out. All of the links that I talked about in the video are in the description below for different products and different forums and groups and websites and things like that. So check those out. There's a lot of useful information in there, and then you can find even more of it on the website like I mentioned. Now if you're into 3D printing or you're wanting to get into 3D printing, I hope you'll subscribe to this channel. I hope you found this video useful enough to merit a subscribe. And also I hope that you'll check out some of my social media stuff. A lot of times I'm just printing a cool little file here or this little gadget or gizmo there, and I'll just put those updates on my Instagram or Facebook feeds. So be sure to check out the 3D Printing Zone on Instagram and Facebook. And if you've got comments, please do share those. There's going to be hopefully lots of comments in here on my other video that I did about 3D printing. We ended up with hundreds and thousands of comments, and it's awesome. So if you're here for the first time, check out those comments. Maybe you'll see some cool tips in there of things that will help you with your 3D printing process. So again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for joining me in the 3D Printing Zone, and we'll catch you next time.